Santiago, amigos, and welcome to episode 21 of the Old Man and the CV podcast. Today we are joined by Tim Smith. Tim has been in the music industry for 35 years, started off as a DJ, ended up on Capital Radio, and then moved across into the publishing side of the music business and has managed a few very well-known artists during his time. So today we are joined from a different perspective on ageism and learning new technology from an industry which has young and old working together in proper multi-generational style where they are learning from each other. So let's get on with episode 21. Tim, thank you for joining us on the podcast.
My pleasure. Nice to see you.
Excellent. So you've had a very varied career, working for big companies, independent companies, your own companies. You probably worked with quite a few well-known faces as well. But can you just tell us a few of your career highlights to let our listeners know a little bit more about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been very lucky in a way because I've had two careers. First of all, the career I had as a radio presenter. So the kind of career highlight for me there was probably ending up working on Capital Radio in London, which is a station that I grew up listening to and always wanted to work on. So that was probably the career highlight in sort of part one of my career. And then transitioning into the music business, that's a really tough one to answer because obviously, you know, you work with a lot of great artists and the highlights are always when you take an unsigned act and you see them go on to be successful. Every one of those is a career highlight because you never know for sure what, if you sign a new artist what their career is going to take. But yeah, I mean, look, it's great. I signed a very young Swedish writer called Max Martin, who probably now recognized as one of the, if not the most successful songwriter in the world. Who back in the kind of mid-90s, we did a deal with him and he wrote Hit Me Baby One More Time for Britney Spears. I was in the studio in Stockholm when Britney recorded that song as a kind of a last minute. She'd been there for a week recording because she was signed to the record label that we owned and they didn't have a hit. Her car was waiting outside to take her to the airport. Max had to record something because the boss in New York was desperate to hear something. He tried everything. He had this song left over that everybody had wanted. He pitched it to TLC. Simon Cowell wanted it for a boy band called Five. Literally, she was leaving the studio. He said, just before you go, stick a vocal on this. She went into the vocal booth. She sang Hit Me Baby One More Time, pretty much one take. Got in the car, drove off to the airport. We literally at the time, you didn't have things like MP3s, but I think we played it down the phone to the guy in New York who went, that's a smash. She got off the plane in New York. 8 hours later, and they told her to turn around and get back on the plane and come back to Sweden and finish it off. So being there when something like that happens and that song going on to be the song that it became, that's probably a pretty good career highlight for me.
That's a fantastic story. I really, really like that. You mentioned MP3 there and technology. Obviously, technology has changed a lot during your 25 years. And I should imagine even from, as you say, in the first part of your career, being a DJ and probably in your bedroom originally, with a couple of turntables, practicing being on the radio because that's what you wanted to do. And then going on and having, at the time, a mobile discotheque, going around and sort of doing all the parties and things. And then getting into the music business on the label side early on. The technology from that point to this point now has changed dramatically, and the platforms have changed for distribution as well. So how has technology kind of affected the way that you work?
I mean, when it's probably close to 35 years, not 25 years, by the way. This is where you're supposed to say you don't look that old, Tim, but it's the truth.
Well, that's what I said, 25 years, because no one's going to see this. They're just listening.
So yeah, I suppose when I started on the kind of artist management and publishing side, we would record, have recordable CDs that you would record music onto, and that's what you would use to kind of pitch to people. Then that tape came in, and that kind of took over a little bit. You used to put your masters onto a physical thing, and then mini disc kind of had a little bit of a moment where it kind of, we were trying to use mini disc, but it didn't really happen. But at the time, obviously, you're still selling CDs, not so much vinyl in those days, but still CDs. You just mentioned Britney Spears. We would do a first week sales, worldwide sales, where she'd shift 5 million units in a week of CDs. No one would do that nowadays. They haven't done that for years. Obviously, then the MP3 came along, and I remember having conversations with record company execs, chairmen of labels at the time, going, this will never take off. We don't need to worry about this. And they didn't. And that's how the whole Napster and pirate thing became big, and it kind of caught the music industry with its pants down, and the industry had to play catch up. And then the likes of Spotify and Apple came along first, and then Spotify. Again, a lot of the industry that was run by dare we say older people that didn't quite weren't quite in touch with what the kids were doing, didn't really kind of take it that seriously. And at the time, I think, unfortunately, that's why a lot of the licensing deals that were done by the DSPs, weren't great in favor of the record industry, and more so the music publishing industry, because I don't think anybody took them that seriously. Thought it was going to be a bit of a flash in the pan. And we're still playing catch up now in terms of that. But what streaming has done, I suppose, is two things. It rejuvenated the industry in terms of back catalogue and made music more accessible to everybody. But actually, kind of the reverse happened, that what the labels expected is it gave the artist back the power, because it meant that an artist could release music without the need to go to a record company. They didn't have to sign away their rights or their life forever, to a label in order to get their music to market. They could go and do that directly through the various companies that set up digital distribution companies, and they could release their music, and they could have success, and they could be streaming in the millions and making all the money. So in that respect, it put the power back in the hands of the artists and not the labels, to the point now where you don't necessarily need a record company. If you're a certain type of artist, you can do it yourself. The biggest challenge we have at the moment, of course, is AI and how that's going to affect the music industry. And, for someone that's been doing this long enough, I can see the same kind of attitudes from people going, oh, wow, it's just a flash in the pan. No, it's not. It's something that we've got to take seriously. And when, the recent thing as an artist called Drake, when an artist, who's probably one of the biggest streaming artists in the world, when a song that sounds exactly like him is released and streams in the millions within 24 hours, and he goes, hang on a minute, that's not me, it's an AI version of him, stop it, take it down. That's the problem, because how do you control the copyright? How do you police this? How do you know who owns what? So that's a big challenge at the moment to the music industry. I don't know what the answer is. I think there's going to be a lot of trial and error and some mistakes made until we kind of work that bit out. But yeah, you just have to adapt. You change. How do I keep in touch with it? It's like any industry, whatever industry you're in, you have to keep in touch. You have to know what's going on. If you're not, you get left behind. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, there's a big legal debate going on, isn't there, about AI and artists, because the copyright is the fact that it is artist generated. Well, what's the definition of artist generated if someone is actually putting something into AI? Surely they are an artist by creating something through AI. So that's a minefield that we don't probably want to get into. But I was going to ask you whether it is a gradual acceptance of new technology or a sudden, oh, what are we going to do about this? But it sounds like it was almost a mixture of both. And you still say there are a number of people who are, in the same way they didn't view streaming as an immediate threat, but are now perhaps not recognizing AI as the next threat. Do you think AI is the next big technology thing, or do you think there's something just around the corner that's going to sort of shake the world?
I think at the moment, from a music industry perspective, it's definitely AI, and I think the industry are coping better with it. Lucian Grange, who's the guy that runs Universal, he certainly seems to have sort of stepped up very early on in this process and sort of said, no, we're not going to stand for this. He's also done the same recently with streaming in terms of thinking that there should be a new streaming model, payment structure. So yeah, he's quite forward thinking, and they are the biggest music company in the world. So if they're doing that first, others will follow. Yeah, I mean, I think the lesson was learned a little bit with streaming, but I think there are still people that kind of, and it's to be honest, it's probably because they don't understand it. That they kind of push it to one side because it's easier to ignore it than it is to try and understand it in some cases. I certainly don't understand it, and I don't. I try and I do everything I can to understand it, but I couldn't sit here now and tell you that I have a complete handle on AI and what it means and how it works. I've got no idea, but I know it's important and I know it's relevant. So therefore, I have to learn. I have to subscribe to the various newsletters and that explain it and do it and read about it and do the research, because otherwise you get left behind. But I'm not afraid to put my hand up and go, I don't really understand this. It's never stopped me in the past.
Did you think there's a certain sort of dichotomy between the music business is seen as a young person's industry? You referenced earlier, largely still run by older people. Artists you tend to view as young and breaking through, but then you've obviously got very successful artists, like Paul McCartney, Mick Jagger, Elton John, who are obviously, moving on in years. Where's the balance?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, if Paul McCartney was to appear tomorrow morning as a new artist at his age and go, I've spent my life as a geography teacher and I've retired and I've written this song called Yesterday and I want to release it, would it be a hit? No, it wouldn't. I don't think. It wouldn't change the song. The song's still probably one of the best songs ever written. Would he have a hit with it? No. The next question is what's a hit? What's a hit record in terms of the way that you and I used to refer to a hit record, as in, it would be in the charts and we'd hear it on the chart show on a Sunday night or whatever. Hits don't exist like that anymore. Hits are, is it big on TikTok? What's the streaming numbers? How many views on YouTube, etc., etc. And that is sadly a young person's game, because it's like it's like your nan used to say, oh, how does Andy or Tim, how do they know how to use the remote control on the TV? They just come in and they can program it straight away. They can record Coronation Street for me. I don't know how to do that. It's the same thing. It's like, the kids of today, are grown up with an ability to just understand technology, because they're born with a phone in their hand pretty much, and they understand it. So again, for the older demographic, we have to learn that. I have to learn about TikTok. It's not natural to me. It's the most important marketing tool in the music industry. I have to really learn about it. Thankfully, I've got kids, and you can learn a lot from listening to your kids and how, and they tell you about it. But again, it's not natural. And I think that, I suppose I'm contradicting myself slightly because of what I said earlier on. Because the power is back in the artist, certainly Paul McCartney could release that song himself without the need to go knocking on a record company's door. Would he be able to have a hit with it? Probably not, because he wouldn't be able to get, the radio play. Or actually, he probably would get the radio play, but the radio play is not enough anymore, as it used to be. It's all the other stuff that you have to do, which artists of a certain age maybe don't quite understand. Now, if Paul McCartney was clever and released that song tomorrow and had a 21-year-old manager that understood the industry, he might have a chance, and was prepared to, play the TikTok game and do all the stuff that he had to do. But would you at 80 years old? Who knows?
Well,
remains to be seen.
Well, that actually resonates on a theme that has been woven into the various podcasts about actually it's not about 50 plus workers or 80 plus artists and younger workers. It's actually about multi-generational and people working together, whereas younger people learning from experience and the knowledge that the older people have, but equally the older people learning from the new skills, the new technologies that are inherent in a younger person's skill set. It kind of sums up, I guess, the music industry, and the fact that 25 years ago, I guess a record label will say, "Hey, Miss Potential Artist, I can get you onto Top of the Pops," whereas now someone's saying, "I can get you 5 million views on TikTok."
That's kind of it. You're absolutely right. Yeah. I mean, record companies are important if you're a certain type of artist, I think, and I think that, in the past, when I've worked with pure pop artists as a manager, you use the record company for one thing, and that's to create a brand, and that's all you want the label to do. You want the label to spend as much money as you can get them to spend, knowing full well that you're probably never going to see any income from that record company. But if you can create a brand with that artist, and that brand can become the biggest in the world, then all the spin-off deals that come from that, whether it be touring, merchandise, branding deals, advertising deals, that's where you make your money. And early on, the record companies weren't quite wise to that. Then they got wise to it. Then this whole talk of, at the time, was 360 deals. So you're not just signing a record deal, but you have to sign this deal with a label, and you have to give them a share of your merch and your live and this, that, and the other. And it was like, well, why? What expertise does a record company have in terms of touring? If you've got some knowledge, if you've got some expertise, and you can help me, I'll give you a piece back. But if you haven't, why should I give you a bit of it? So they got wise to that quite quickly and kind of changed that around. Yeah.
So what would you say would be, as someone with so much experience in your industry, 35 years, forgot to mention the DJing at the start, or the presenting at the start, what lessons do you think our listeners could take away from your podcast today about experience and knowledge?
I think it's two things. I mean, I think experience is everything, isn't it? Really, and I know when I was used to run big companies, I was looking to employ sort of people, employ young kids who, as an A&R job. If they wrote to me and said, I love music and it's my world, and it's everything, it means everything to me, and I'd love to work in the music industry, but I'm currently working in Tesco's, I'd kind of go, okay. If the same person wrote me a letter and went, I love music, everything about it, and I currently work, 1 day a week in HMV when I can, and I help out at a nightclub a couple of nights, or a live venue, or I write a fanzine, that's the person I'd employ. It's slightly unfair, because everyone's got to earn a living, and no reason why you shouldn't work in Tesco's during the day and be into music at night. But I'd always opt for the person that was prepared to live the dream, if you like, and do it. And then experience is everything, but then also so is youth, and kind of expression, youth is wasted on the young. It's kind of like it's so important to have the two, and I can look back on my career and go, I was young once, I was new and fresh to this, but I'd be stupid if I thought that I still was now. So I have to surround myself with younger people. It's otherwise I become stale. No one's going to take me seriously in this industry. Doesn't mean to say I can't work with older artists, because I do, and I can, and that's fine. But if I want to be taken seriously still, you have to play the game, and I can't. If I turned up to a gig, to see a new act playing at the trendiest venue in London to 100 people, then I turned up dressed like a geography teacher, I'm not going to be taken seriously by that act. If I'm trying to impress that act because I want them to work with me or sign with me, I'm going to look, they just won't take me seriously. Would I get a job back in the music? Would I get employed at 58 years old in the music industry? Probably not, if I'm honest. I don't think a record company or a music publishing company now would give me a job at the level that I was at when I left, the industry, when I left being employed and decided to go back out on my own. I'd probably get a consultancy job if I had, again, I think if the person, how do I put this? I think if the person running the company was of a similar age, I'd probably get a job. If the person running the company was 20 years younger than me, I probably wouldn't. And that annoys me a little bit because I don't think the music industry actually puts enough value on experience. I think you do get a little bit written off, I think, when you get to a certain age. But then, saying that, if I found the next Dua Lipa, right, or the next Lewis Capaldi, and through my team, we're able to turn that artist into a global success, I'd probably win Artist Manager of the Year, at the Music Week Awards, or and I'd be standing up on stage getting an answer, and everybody would go, "Tim, you're a genius, fantastic." But that's not necessarily. I mean, it is for me because I've done, but it's more because of the artist. It just so happens that he's managed by someone who's 58 years old, but he could equally be managed by someone who's 28 years old. So it's a tough question to answer because, as I said, you don't see many people of my age holding down big positions in the music industry. I mean, Lucian Granger, I said, who runs Universal, he's a few years old, he's probably 60. Rob Stringer that runs Sony globally, he's probably my age. Who else is there? Warner's is run by someone who's a bit younger than me, actually, Max. So, but there's very few at that level. There's very few. Some of the companies like BMG, for example, German companies, they have very strict retirement policies. You get to a certain age, you're forced to retire. Whether you want to or not, they try and keep things moving by that person goes, the next person comes up, and they keep that thing moving, no matter how successful you are. And again, I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. It seems to work for some companies, others it doesn't. It's just the way it is, I think.
Tim Smith, music industry executive, thank you very much for joining the podcast today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, my thanks today to Tim Smith. I hope you enjoyed that extended episode. Very interesting. Hope you enjoyed the various anecdotes and the insights. You can reach Tim through the episode notes and click on his LinkedIn profile. Have a good week. We'll see you next week. Just time for the credits. For the music intro and the idents, Abigail, Eva, Ollie, Ron. This is an Almost Pro production for 23 Magic, copyright 2023. See you next week, Santiago amigos.